Um, Welcome to our exciting panel this afternoon on scaling models for sustainable social enterprises. My name is Alex Nicholls from the University of Oxford, lecturer in social entrepreneurship there, and it's my pleasure to moderate the panel today. We're starting a bit late, for which apologies. We have the one advantage that the session after this is my plenary, so we can really go on as long as we like to see how we go. So we're going to consider this afternoon a variety of different issues around scale and scaling in this space. We're going to, of course, touch on, I think, issues of finance, but we're going to also attempt to focus on other strategic questions and models and examples from our esteemed panel of successful and perhaps unsuccessful scaling at the organisation level. And I suppose we're going to want to ask some basic questions about what we mean by scale, and there are often, I think, assumptions made in this space that there are very similar patterns of scaling and advantages of scale in social enterprises compared with SMEs or commercial enterprises or mainstream enterprises. And it may well be that that often is the case, but equally it may not be the case. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that the notion that scaling organizational size, for example, may always be a benefit in terms of your organizational success may not be true in this sector in every case. Sometimes small is beautiful. The notion that scale will give you scale economies may not be true too. So your fixed costs may not be fixed as you increase your organizational reach in social mission terms, and therefore you're never going to have a sort of sweet spot where your income is geared against your fixed costs. So I think we have to ask questions about what scale means in this space, and I suppose from the investment point of view, also consider how, at least superficially attractive notions of scale are to investors. That might be to do with the thresholds of capital allocation that many organizations work under. So, they simply can't invest in small organizations. Or it may be something to do with their interest in the assumptions that scale brings that I've just mentioned in terms of a good investment. So I think there's a range of important and exciting issues we need to cover today. So, to our panel, we have three experts to give us different perspectives on some of the key questions in this area from their own experience. Ramona Ramos, Executive Director of the World Fair Trade Organization Asia. WFTO, as many of you may know, is one of two representative bodies of the fair trade movement globally. WFTO, the World Fair Trade Organization, has more fair traders that may not have the famous fair trade label as the other network organization in fair trade, although many do. And it has a different cultural and sort of historical tradition, perhaps, from other parts of the fair trade movement. But I can tell you from going to some of their meetings in places like Kathmandu, they throw a great party, as well as being a wonderful organization. So you're very welcome. Randall Kempner from ANDE in Aspen, the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, represents an organization that's doing some fascinating work in pulling together different capacity builders and key actors in the ecosystem, I guess you'd say, of social enterprise and social entrepreneurship. And they range across a number of important initiatives. One I've been looking at recently is some of their work on some of the performance measurement issues that we've been sort of talking through already today. But I think there's a number of other important things they work on too. And Sourabh Sharma, the serial entrepreneur on the panel, I guess, or maybe other colleagues are serial entrepreneurs too, co-founder of Milaap in India, which is, some of you may know, a microfinance crowdfunding platform. So something in the spirit of Kiva, though, well, I'll leave you perhaps to talk about some comparisons with Kiva that we were talking about earlier, but one of the fascinating aspects, I think, of what he's doing is really addressing head-on some of the criticism that we've been sort of very familiar with recently about high interest rates in microfinance in India particularly. by means of using the technology and crowdfunding approaches that I think they're putting in place. But I won't say any more other than to thank our panel for joining us and ask Ramona to begin with her remarks, please. Yes, you can clap if you like. That's nice.
Thank you. It's not really necessary. Anyway, so this presentation is just all about what this WFTO in Asia is all about. So in the scaling up models, we said that we have been building a robust and healthy linkage between fair trade enterprises and markets. And WFTO, or World Fair Trade Organization, is the only global network whose member enterprises represent fair trade chain from producer to sale. Right now, we have around 400 enterprises in 73 countries and in 5 regions. That's including Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe, and the Pacific. So what is our goal? It's to enable small producers to improve their livelihood and communities through sustainable fair trade solutions. Delivering market access through policy, advocacy, campaigning, marketing, and monitoring. Right now in Asia, we have 140 trading enterprises, 18 are in food, 122 are in crafts, and out of this 140 trading enterprises, we have 123 fair trade shops in 15 countries in Asia. And we are now exporting to 6 continents. The regional branch of 161 members in 18 countries. So what are these food products right now? We have rice, that's in Thailand. We have tea, that's everywhere in Southeast Asia. And also in South Asia, that's Sri Lanka. We have coffee, we have sugar. The very new item is cocoa sugar, of course, that's from the Philippines. We have salt, we have vinegar, we have nuts, we have dried fruits, spices, juices and wine. And for crops, we have giftware, homeware, and these are all natural and handmade. So we are all inspired, all of us who are involved in fair trade, because there are stories stimulating our curiosity and touches our hearts. So very recently, last May, we have celebrated our World Fair Trade Day in 2012. And what are we doing when we say building a robust and healthy linkage between fair trade enterprises and market? These were some of our propositions to our fair trade organizations. So you have to coordinate demand and aggregate supply. You have to build the enterprise capacities from very targeted interventions demanded from markets and customers. You have to build a credible food sector strategy to promote food in a way that may also help crops and enhance our network value to gain balance and diversity. And of course, promote fair trade among consumers. So we can do this with you, as we always say. You need a heart and determination to step up and be the hero for millions of people belonging to some of the poorest community in Asia. You buy fair trade products from any of our fair trade shops or through WFTO shop online, because right now we are already doing e-commerce. You have to help us through sponsorships, volunteering, or participating in any of our program activities for the poor. You did not create a significant change, but you have caused ripples of positive changes more than you could ever imagine. You can make it possible for fair trade enterprises to do more and continue their good deeds, and you can really change the world for the better. You can make the choice now. So again, I would like to make this an opportunity to invite you that we will have our next Asia conference in Goa, India, and our title would be Launching the Sustainability Chain. It's an Asia conference on building consumer confidence for fair trade, because right now we believe that we have been doing so many good things around, but the consumers are not conscious about it. So let us be together in this conference and build the consumer confidence for fair trade and for social enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you. As I said, they throw a great party, so it should be wonderful. Maybe I'll just ask one question before we move along. in terms of just what you were talking to in terms of fair trade. I mean, what have, at WFTO, what are you, what have you learned in terms of building successful fair trade enterprises sort of to scale?
As I have mentioned, we are on the supply chain. We have been doing a lot of capacity building so that our supply or our products, fair trade products, could become the quality products that the market would want. And in doing so, we have been encountering a lot of problems as well. But this problem, this is just about skills, capacitating them in terms of skills. So what we did was to really provide them a lot of skills building or capacity training so that the products, the fair trade products that will be sold in the market will be something that will be, catering to the requirements of the consumers. That's one thing. So we have been doing a lot of capacity training. We have been, you will notice that we have a lot of products already from these 400 organizations, not just in Asia, but around the world. And one problem that we have identified to scale up supply is to also to scale up market. So you cannot scale up supply when you don't know about scaling up market. So those are two things that cannot be left out, supply and market. Right now, as I have been telling in another session, we have a very new product. We have launched a very new product, which is the cocoa sugar. And we have now a lot of inventory. And the only thing that we can help the supply chain continue with what they are doing, or the social enterprise to continue with what they're doing, is to really back it up with the necessary market. The consumers are the market of these products. And so that's why in our next agenda, we are really building consumer confidence, because that's what we have learned. We have been doing a lot on the supply side, but we have not done so much on the consumer side or on the market side.
Thank you very much. So the importance of capacity building, I think, for the organizational level, but also as a mechanism to create more active markets, I think has been one of the great successes of fair trade. And I think that does perhaps lead into what some of the things Randall may be talking to us about in terms of Andy's work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. And, working? I'll trade. Thanks. So thanks for the introduction, and thanks to all of you for coming. I know it's late. We may get the snorers back in this particular room. What I wanted to do is just speak a little bit about what ANDE is, and then by way of background, we were sort of asked to think about some of the myths associated with scaling. So I'm going to give a brief presentation about 3 myths and talk about some of the ways that the challenges that these myths are related to are being addressed. But first, what ANDE is a network now of about 150 organizations that represent the full ecosystem of players in what we call the small and growing business space. So our mission is to try to create a movement like microfinance, but aimed at the next level up. So we're talking about trying to help businesses that have between 5 and 10 at the minimum, up to 200 employees, and are looking for growth capital between $20,000 and $2 million. A large number of our members explicitly focus on social entrepreneurs and or would call themselves impact investors. But we range across, again, the whole set of players. So I was just looking at some of the speakers that we've had here today. So Justina Lai, the Rockefeller Foundation, has been a major funder and is a member of ANDE. Neera Nundi, who's one of the leaders of Dasra in India. They do capacity development and incubation. They're members of ANDE. Laura Callanan of McKinsey is a member of ANDE, as is Wolfgang in LGT. So that's an investor, a consulting firm, a capacity development organization, and a foundation, so that represent the flavor of what we do. And broadly, we're like an industry association. So we have programs to try to help grow the sector, advocacy to investors, advocacy to development financial institutions. And we also have programs and services to help our members be more productive. So conferences, newsletters, research, big focus on impact assessment and metrics, a major focus on training of the staff of our member organizations, and then we have something called a capacity development fund, where we receive money that we re-grant to support innovations to drive the field forward. So that's a little bit about what ANDE is. And I want to start then with this key myth. And the first myth I want to say and hopefully it's already been debunked, but if you haven't heard it enough, the myth is that capital is the biggest constraint to growth for social enterprises. Capital is not the biggest issue. It makes a top 3, but it's not number 1. So based upon the surveys that we've done and the interviews and the experience of the ANDE membership, we would say that number 1 is talent and access to talent. The second constraint is access to markets, market information, and market understanding. And then the third is capital. So talent, why is that the big deal? You've heard this, I hope, throughout the day. Ultimately, it's teams. For a company to succeed, you need to have a great team. And in most emerging markets, you might have a great entrepreneur, but then she will not be easily able to find a team that can truly scale, that can grow a business. It's a significant, significant challenge. So that's talent. The second is this market access and market understanding. Even if you have the right people, to truly get capital for growth, you need to convince someone that you truly understand the marketplace and understand what customers want in those areas that you're trying to serve. But unfortunately, in most emerging markets, you can't buy off-the-shelf research reports on market segmentation. The cost of doing market understanding, market research is much higher. And in some cases, you really can't do it very well at all because the people you're trying to research are illiterate. So there's some ways to address these challenges that I'll talk about, but it's very difficult to get that market information. And many times the entrepreneurs don't recognize they really need to have the deeper understanding. And then the third is capital. And here's where I'll say the second myth. The second myth is that the primary source of capital for social entrepreneurs should be or will be from impact investment equity funds. It's actually not about equity. There's never going to be enough impact investment funds to provide the capital that we would want to see flowing into social enterprises. What we need are banks, straight, boring, plain, vanilla banks and or offshoots that are only focused on SMEs that are willing to make loans to social enterprises. Today, as I suspect most of you know, the cost of getting a loan for small business in emerging markets ranges from really high to astronomical. So the collateral rates are greater than 100%, and the interest rates are well beyond what most small businesses can pay. So banks aren't really playing a significant role yet. So again, if it's talent, market understanding, and then capital, what are some interesting ways of addressing those challenges? And I don't think any of the ones that I'm going to tell you about can claim to be successes yet, but I want to create a sense of optimism that there are some interesting models that are being attempted around the world. So on the talent side, ANDE, through our Capacity Development Fund, has actively engaged in a variety of kind of methodologies to try to drive growth or drive improvement. One is a management best practices training program that Acumen Fund and Root Capital have developed and are presently implementing in Costa Rica and Kenya. They're doing one in the United States and in India, where they're trying to do train-the-trainer programs for the intermediaries that work with, so incubators, accelerators, mentorship organizations. How can they get better at training the management of the client companies which they have? So that curriculum is being implemented and will be something which is open to the public. Another thing that Oxfam has piloted in Central America is a talent bank. This again is aimed at intermediaries, but the idea is that there's a lot of talent that exists in the various NGOs and investment funds and foundations that are supporting the space that could be shared. And so the idea is that everyone puts a certain number of hours in a talent bank, and then you get access to the expertise that exists in different organizations that you can bring in to help yours. Now again, this is being tried for the intermediaries, but it's also the kind of thing that could be tried for actual social entrepreneurs. And a third thing is an Africa Talent Fund that Dahlberg has developed. And this is an idea where they will try to get expats to come back to Africa, will put an amount of investment into a company to offset the higher salary that they may want to get a skilled manager. And then on the upside, if the company succeeds, both the manager and this fund will get paid back once there is some sort of liquidity event or distribution of dividends. So it's a way of paying forward the money necessary to attract high talent, but then having an upside if the company succeeds. On the market knowledge and access side, I would commend some work that Monitor Group, it's another ANDE member, has been doing, and Harvey Coe, I think, is somewhere in the, I don't see him here, but he's supposed to be in the conference. 2 reports, one's called Emerging Markets, Emerging Models, and the other one is called Promise and Progress. In these 2, they identify a number of business models that can be utilized to serve the base of the pyramid customers. So they're doing some of the market research already about which models around the world have been successful. I would comment that good incubators will help their members come together to do shared joint market research and will link up to universities like this one in, say, Oxford, where you can get access to inexpensive business school students to do this work for you. So that's another thing that one sees. And also that you're beginning to see governments and corporations that will either sponsor or share information. One of the things that big corporations in particular can do is help share the information which they have developed in their market research with companies that want to serve the base of the pyramid, in adjacent products or products that aren't going to be competitive. So Coke, for example, which has a lot of information and distribution channels, has been willing to share both of those with social enterprises that want to serve the base of the pyramid. And then finally, on the capital side, and as it relates to debt and getting these banks involved, I mean, there's a good reason why banks aren't making these loans. They consider the risk-reward ratio not worth it. But why is that? Because the cost of doing the due diligence on a $50,000 loan is the same as one for a $500,000 loan. So why would you do the one that costs more when you can get one that's bigger? Well, so it makes sense. There's a really fascinating effort that's been underway now for a few years by a Harvard now spin-out called the Entrepreneurial Finance Lab, which is using psychometric testing to assess the risk likelihood or the likelihood of default of a social entrepreneur, or of any entrepreneur, frankly, it's not just social. So basically they're saying, take this test and we can tell you whether or not this person is likely to default on the loan. And it sounds extraordinary that it could actually be working, but Standard Bank has piloted this in 4 African countries and has now made the decision to expand it to all of its African offices. And they have found that it is actually doing as well as their traditional process, which was 5 or 10 times more expensive, of identifying good credit risks. So it still needs to be tested in Latin America. The Inter-American Development Bank is promoting this. They're talking, EFL is with a variety of other banks throughout the world. But this is a kind of game-changing innovation that might actually make it possible for banks to make these loans more accessible. And the other thing I would say is, in terms of financing, straight equity is almost never the right answer in this space. Most of the social entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs out there don't want to give up control of their companies, management control. Yet most private equity funds like that. So there are a variety of hybrid models that have been discussed and are being utilized. And I would point to the work of both Business Partners and Grofin, which are both based in South Africa, for using royalty-based finance as a mechanism where they are getting access to capital coming in from dividends based on revenues, so the investor's happy, yet they're taking minority stakes of equity. So that means the company owners are happy. So those are some responses, and now I'll just finish with my third myth, since we're talking about scaling. And it comes from where I sit, which is we're about trying to grow the sector, and ultimately we care about trying to impact poverty. My line of the month is, I don't care about creating an asset class, I care about creating a middle class. And so from this perspective, the answer is that scale may not be best completed at a company by company basis. So I don't care if an individual firm scales. What I want to see is replication of business models. So let's scale the models, not necessarily the businesses. And may many businesses succeed, but ultimately from a sector perspective, we care about these models being replicated around the world. So thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for some wonderful examples there. Maybe just one follow-up question from me. Sorry, really to your last point, and I mean, you gave these some very interesting and powerful examples of kind of project level or collaborative level models and scaling initiatives. But at this kind of more systemic level, do you see any of that happening? This kind of really so say sort of franchise or replication model. Is that do you see that, or and how might you work towards pushing that?
So not a lot is the answer. Everyone is still concerned about their own individual model, generally. But I would commend the work of Monitor in particular in this space, where they've gone out and done the hard work of identifying now 12 to 15 models which they say can be useful in some sectors. And so I think now the information is out there, and then it's up to organizations like ours, but not only ours, to promote those as opportunities for small businesses to employ. And I think you're seeing that. You are definitely seeing discussions of models that have worked in India now being applied in Africa. And in some cases, it's actually companies going that way, but more the models than the company.
Great, thank you very much. So if we can move now to our... Oh, sorry. Yeah, of course. Sorry, of course.
In Fairtrade, we call it sharing of best practices, actually. That when you replicate one model, one good model, and another organization will do the same thing, so we call it sharing of business practices.
Thank you. So to Sourabh.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I just want to have a show of hands. How many in the room are actually social enterprises looking for scale or have actually scaled up? And who are invested in social enterprises and they want their enterprises to scale up? All right, quite a bit. Right, so just to quickly tell you, Milaap is a crowdfunding platform for microfinance. So it's like a Kiva for India, those of you who are familiar. Those of you who are not familiar, it basically allows everyday individuals like you and me to give loans to the poor. And these loans are used not for traditional microfinance, which is typically like, I want a loan to buy a buffalo or buy a cow, or I run a small shop and I want a loan for that. It's basically for helping people get access to basic services like water, clean drinking water, sanitation, vocational training which guarantees you a job, as well as getting solar lighting installed in your houses. So basically trying to change the basic lifestyle of the people itself to lead them to have more savings, better productivity, and a healthier life, or at the same time creating income generating activities for them, so getting them jobs and things like that. Now, one of the main challenges which we faced when we started out was being able to raise global capital as debt. And everyone we went to, so Kiva, for example, does not lend to India till date, and they are the largest in the space, 6 years old and more. But there are a lot of companies within India who are raising only domestic capital. And we went out to a lot of people and said, why is it not possible? And everyone said, oh, the regulations are too tough and things like that. And we said, if we are doing this, we have to be able to make sure that everyone around the world is able to give loans to India. And that required a lot of lobbying with the RBI, which is the Reserve Bank of India. It required going back and forth, making sure that the structure of the entity itself is compliant with the regulations. So what I'm trying to say is one of the first things is that if you're looking for scale, you have to be thinking of scale right from the beginning. You have to be thinking of scale at the design stage itself. You have to decide that you are doing this for scale right at the beginning. So another challenge which I face, especially, I'm actually the oldest in the team. The other two guys, my co-founders, are younger than me, and they have all those regular challenges of parents telling them, why don't you do a regular job? We paid so much for your education. And even to me, people were like, do this on the side, or But I believe that you have to do it with 200% heart. It's not something which you can start on a volunteer basis, you can do on the side. You have to put your 200%, otherwise don't do it, or don't expect it to scale up, right? And that also we see in our entire DNA of the company itself. So a lot of times people give us requests now. So we are 2 years old now. We have more than $250,000 deployed in loans. It's been raised from the entire spectrum, from high net worth individuals to corporates to retail guys who give $50, $100. But now we have reached a scale where we get a lot of people coming in saying, hi, you guys are doing great work, and I want to volunteer some of my time with you. And I just tell them straight up, why do you want to volunteer your time? We'll pay for your time. And they're like, no, but I have a full-time job. I said, why don't you look at this as a full-time job if we are so passionate about it, right? So those are the kind of, a lot of prejudices which people have. Oh, you're a social company, and therefore you probably don't have money to pay, and therefore I will, volunteer my time. And this is the same thing when we do talent acquisition. So when we do talent acquisition, we don't try to sell ourselves as a social company at all. We just go in and we say we are a tech startup, we run this awesome crowdfunding platform, we use Ruby on Rails, NoSQL, and all the stuff, and come join us and we'll build an awesome team. So one piece of advice which I have is that the social card, if I can say that social card you have to play very carefully, and you don't have to use the social card to discount yourself. I think you have to use that social card to basically add an icing on top, which basically means that you have all the things as tough as a regular startup, and you probably have some things which are even tougher because you're social, so probably you don't need to play that card all the time, right? So another example which I have is that on our website, when you make payments, right, it requires, we have to pay a certain fees to the payment gateway. Now the initial, a lot of these other sites do that they pass on the payment gateway fees to the lender who's making the payment. That means if you want to make a loan of $100, you actually pay $104, and the $4 covers for the payment gateway fees. And to most of these other websites which I spoke, they said it's pretty normal because we want to make sure 100% of the money goes to the poor. But we asked ourselves that question: is there any e-commerce website which passes the payment gateway fees to the purchaser? The answer was no. I said, then why do we need to do it, right? So you can argue that e-commerce websites actually bump up the price of the product and accommodate that, and in our case, we don't do it. Still, we took the hard call and we said that we are going to cover it as part of our marketing fees, but the user experience for the user should be that if he's putting $100, it doesn't matter what the payment gateway is charging, he needs to make sure that $100 goes to the end borrower. So what I'm trying to say is that you need to treat yourself as a regular startup as much as possible, and things are probably a lot tougher for you, not because of yourself, but of course the prejudices which people have in the sense that the right kind of talent does not approach you, or if they approach you thinking it's volunteer time. Also, when you talk to investors, people automatically assume that your IRR is not great, right? Without even looking into your revenue model and things like that. And on the revenue model, I have one more point to say is that it's okay to have a revenue model, it's okay to charge the poor. Actually, to give everything for free is not a very healthy thing. It's okay to charge the poor if you think that it's not good to charge them too much. Actually, I also agree it's not good to charge them too much, but then find alternative revenue streams, charge someone else, find a creative business model, right? For example, take the biggest example is Google, right? The consumers don't pay, but someone else pays. So be creative about that. And these are some of the things which we have implemented in Milaap ourselves, right? So we charge a 7% interest on the loans when we give it out to them, and another 7% gets added, and the end borrower pays 14%. So which is 50% lower than any microfinance loan available to the people. But we were very clear that going forward, if we will find additional revenue streams, we're not going to charge the poor more, but we are going to find additional revenue streams, which is in the form of market data, which we are collecting, the financial information, the income behavior, the expense behavior we are collecting about the people at the bottom of the pyramid. And this data is firstly hard to measure, hard to collect, and secondly, it's not available easily. So that kind of data we're going to collect, API it out, and make it available to anyone who needs it in the form of market research, right? So you have to think of along these lines and never shortchange yourself by calling yourself social or using it in the wrong way. Yeah, I think
Thank you very much. Maybe just one quick follow-up before we open it up to the audience. I mean, your sort of entrepreneurial expertise and action has been around tech platforms and tech innovations. Do you think there's something particular, or what sort of opportunities do you think there might be in tech innovation around some of these questions of scale and sustainable social enterprise? Do you see any particular opportunities from a tech point of view?
I think technology should be used from day one. I mean, technology is an obvious tool for enabling something bigger. And that they're available everywhere in the form of, whether it be in the form of communication with the farmers, or whether it be in the form of enabling people to connect. But you also have to be very careful about how you use it, and not go in your own reality distortion field that the farmers are going to use an app on the phone or something like that. You have to be very, very close to reality when it comes to that. Right? Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, thank you to all our panel for being so good on timekeeping. So I think we now have quite a lot of time to talk as a group. So it's open to you to ask questions of the panel, and we have microphones, I think. So who would like to go first? Perhaps if you could step up, please. Maybe tell us who you are.
Yeah, I'm Armin Bauer from Asian Development Bank. When I came to this meeting, I thought of scaling up as something from social enterprises, what you are all, to inclusive business. That means basically from the investment of up to 250,000 to an investment of, let's say, 2 to 10 million. How do you scale up this? How do you make this jump? Because that's actually where all those private investors sitting here, including the private sector arm of the Asian Development Bank, would invest. They would not invest in social enterprises because they don't get they think they don't get the rate of return they're expecting. So they're really looking at, and I think most of the investors, the real investors, are looking at inclusive business type of things, which is bigger investments, bigger rate of return, and so on and so forth. How do you scale up from a social enterprise, or can it be done at all? I mean, maybe your advice is the best one to scale up through replication.
I mean, maybe. Well, I suppose there's also an implicit assumption there. Maybe we should also consider whether that's a good thing. I mean, that may, whether or not it's possible, whether that's a good thing. Maybe we could add. Anyone like to comment?
Well, I'll take a first cut. Sorry. The reality is, I don't think there's a significant history of small businesses in the social enterprise space getting to that size. But that's also because, at least as we're thinking about it now, there's not that much history to look at. I mean, the vast majority of companies that, of any sort, right, that start looking for some sort of investment at the $20,000 or $50,000 phase don't end up getting to the place where they get $10 million. I mean, in the United States, where you would assume it goes very well, I mean, it's an infinitesimal number of small businesses that actually make it. So I don't think that's an indictment on the small and growing business space. And frankly, I would say, to throw it back on you, I would hope that the Asian Development Bank and your development bank colleagues around the world would be more willing to take risks in these kinds of companies, because you should have a development impact as part of your goal. And indeed, one of the challenges is that many of the development financial institutions seemingly sort of forget that along the way, and they're so focused on trying to get the same IRR as a public sector, a traditional private sector investor, that we sort of get lost, and there's this gap in funding. And again, I'm not trying to pick on the ADB in particular. What I would say is that today, most social enterprises, most, not all, in my opinion, actually do require some trade-off between social impact and IRR. Now, I desperately want funds like IGNIA, which is based in Mexico, and is famously talking about how there really is no trade-off. I want them desperately to be right, but to this point, I don't think they can prove that they're right. And I would love for anyone in the audience or someone else to prove that I'm wrong, but the development banks then should say, all right, let's go out and take this risk, and let's see if we can get that return. And then companies will grow. I mean, in the next 10 years, you will have more examples of this. There will be examples. But whether or not they're enough to call it an asset class, who knows?
Other?
I would like to answer in behalf of our fair trade organizations. We would like to scale up. In fact, it was part of our 4-year strategic plan that started in 2009 and it will end in 2015. So part of the strategy is to really to scale up our production so that we can scale up market. We would need capital. In fact, we need capital. But again, the problem is the banks are not ready to lend that amount of money that we need to scale up. So I think this forum is very important since you are here and you call yourself impact investors, what are you really for? Are you really after the ROI, or are we really for the combination of the, are we saying the environmental and the ROI? So I would like to invite you to start investing in the fair trade organizations, because they are ready. We are really ready to make a fair trade economy, but you know, we need someone else to be with us.
Thank you. And I mean, one reflection I would have is that I think we have to be very much clearer than perhaps we are sometimes about the spectrum of investors that are in this space, which is a very wide spectrum. And I don't think we should expect sort of the social enterprise landscape to organize itself around one set of investors. Now, maybe those set of investors happen to have most of the money, so that is not trivial, but nevertheless, I think we have to recognize that there may well be examples, either current or future, that can manage to look a lot like conventional investments, and there may well be many others that aren't, and I don't think we should worry about that. I think we should develop an investment marketplace that works for a range of different types of investments. But that's my view. Other questions? Madam, yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to pick up. My name is Lina Green, by the way. I just wanted to pick up on the discussion that just went on. I'm perfectly actually one of those who believes that scalability through replicability is really the model to go instead of scaling the particular. But what's interesting is that when we did a gap analysis of where the funding is, even in social enterprise, inverted commas, scaling, if you're using scalability through replicability, some of these funds, for example, taking away banks and I'm talking about foundations, is they tend to give social enterprises that have been around for 5 years. So if you're trying to do replication and you're taking new enterprises, then you still end up with a gap analysis. And then in terms of what he mentioned about IRR, it is kind of disconcerting to me that while there is, in fact, a movement to look at investing in social enterprise, the calculations on return is still kind of ambiguous. I tend to agree with you that in an ideal world, yes, you would get social impact and financial returns. But I've studied some social enterprises in India that are quite successful, ready to scale. And even they, after 15 years, have only single-digit returns because a lot of the investment had to go into building the ecosystem, which is really where the development money would be perfect for. So I'm just wondering, where are we at this juncture right now in Asia? It seems like the players are there, we're talking about it, but we still have a gap that needs to be filled here. And what are your thoughts on that?
Any offers?
Well, I will not speak from a great place of knowledge in Asia, but I think I can answer pretty clear that I'm right here. No place in the world has figured this out yet. But Asia's behind places, and I'll exclude India, but as we heard of Southeast Asia in particular, there's less going on here than there is in India, than there is in sub-Saharan Africa, and than there is in Latin America. But even if you pick a market like Kenya or like India, which is relatively advanced, we still don't have the ecosystems in place. So this sector is nascent. It is accelerating. You know, ANDE does a survey every year of our members. We have about 35 to 40 now investment funds that are members. And we ask them how many investments they've made. So over the entire lifetime of these funds, most of which are less than 5 years old, some go back as many as 10, but 40% of the total investments were made in this past year. And that's not a negative, it's just a reflection of the fact that we're at the beginning stages of this and it's accelerating. But we're not, we haven't hit a tipping point yet. We don't have the marketplaces in place to really make sure that this industry works. And I won't take all the time here, but there's lots of efforts to do these things, the ecosystem building efforts, including Asia IIX, but they're one of many marketplaces that are being developed, but none of them have actually done any significant number of deals. So we're working on it, but don't get out ahead of ourselves, but don't give up on us too soon.
I'm not sure whether all of you are familiar with how fair trade works. As I have mentioned, fair trade is very much present in the South and in the North. And what we have tried to develop really is a complete value chain, in the sense that whatever the producer produce can be sold in the North. So right now, I cannot say, or we cannot say that we have done so much, But what we would like to say is we have started something like a good model that can work both in the south, that's the producing, and can work, that can be very useful in the north. So I think this impact investment will work, except that the problem is we are not meeting in the middle. We are not ready, both ready, the investor and the supply, to meet. And I think what we should be doing right now is to increase that level of confidence that the investors are confident enough to invest in the social good that we are talking about, because there are so many things to do socially that could account to an improved impact investment. The IRR, or the ROI, the return of investment, will, you know, this is, I'm not a technical person on investment. I am a person who only know how to help the poor farmers or the poor artisan, and then see how